about her artwork and African animals and so forth. It was terrific, and we're delighted to have her back. Alison is an artist inspired by Africa. She's lived in Botswana and Zimbabwe for several years and periodically returns to sketch in the bush. She also works with African conservation organizations and leads art safaris for Africa Geographic. She's a signature member of Artists for Conservation and the Society of Animal Artists, and is a member of the Explorers Club and I'm going to not pronounce this right, Salmagundi Club. There you go. To see her art, much more than she'll be able to show you today, please visit her website, artinspiredbyafrica.com. It's in our newsletter, quite worthwhile. And welcome back, Alison. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Yeah. So it's great to be back again. It doesn't feel like it was a year since I was here last, but there we go. So today I'm going to be talking about African wild dogs, also known as painted dogs, particularly in Zimbabwe. And I'll talk about why they have that name in a moment. So let's just, before we begin, I just want to show you some of the main features of these dogs. A lot of people confuse them with hyenas. And you'll see a photo in a moment of an African wild dog next to a hyena, and you'll notice that they don't look at all similar. But of course, people who haven't seen that often confuse them with hyenas. So the really key features of these dogs, and they are genetically they are a member of the canid family, but they are not closely related to any other living canid still alive today. They are not closely related to domestic dogs, to wolves, to jackals, none of those. They branched off the evolutionary tree thousands of years ago. And one of the distinctive features is that they have no dew claw. So those of you who have a pet dog will know that kind of on their wrist, your dog will have a dew claw, unless you got it from a breeder and they may have had them removed. But domestic dogs, wolves, jackals, they all have that. The African wild dog doesn't have that dew claw. So effectively they have fewer toes. They have these very large ears that you see here, and initially people thought that was to help them hear. You know, when you see big ears, you think, oh, help them hear. But there's also evidence that has been found fairly recently that when these dogs are running, and they are capable, like most dogs, of running huge distances without expending too much effort, when they're running, those ears help funnel air across their brain and keep them cool, which is quite amazing. Their coats, they have three coloured coats. So there's this tawny colour, black and a brown and a white patches. And their coats are individually marked. So most dogs, in fact all dogs, will have dark ears, they'll have the dark eyes, the dark muzzle, and they almost all have a white tip to their tails. But other than that, their coat markings are completely individual. And that's how they actually tell each other apart. It's how you can tell when certain dogs leave a pack and go to form a new pack. It's believed that they actually look at coat patterns to figure out whether they might be closely related to the dogs they come across. And if they're too closely related, they won't join up with them and form a pack. So they're really intriguing animals. What I'm going to do here is just talk to you about one of the projects. There are two main projects that I've worked with. One of them was, and this is the first time that I really got to know the dogs, was in Zimbabwe down here. And if I just show you a map of Zimbabwe, we were over here. This is Wangi National Park. which is Zimbabwe's biggest national park. Here's Victoria Falls, so this is Zambia up here, this is Botswana over here, and this is South Africa down here. And so this is Wangi National Park is a very large park, and there are parks on the Botswana side of the border and on the Zambian side. So there's a very big sort of trans-frontier conservation area there. And it's a very good place to see the dogs. And I was visiting Painted Dog Conservation, who are based on the outside of Wangi National Park, just around here. And I was visiting them for 6 weeks. This was back in 2007, and I went there in order to sketch dogs and to learn about the project. And then when I came back here, I put together an exhibit and a lecture series. So here is an example where you can see, here's the African wild dog or painted dog. This is a spotted hyena. This is a black-backed jackal. And that's a spotted hyena as well. So you see the difference between these two animals. They're not at all closely related either. The spotted hyena is most closely related to mongooses and civets, not to cats or dogs. The jackal is a canid like the African wild dog. And you can see here another feature of the dogs, which is that they're built like a greyhound almost. They have very long legs. They're about the height of, about, say, this height here, but very lightweight, very skinny. Even when they've fed well, they never get fat, never look fat. They have an amazing metabolism, so they can eat really, really fast and take in their food very fast, but they don't put on weight, so they need to be hunting constantly. So that's the equivalent between the species here. And here's a close-up of one of the dogs. They have these lovely amber eyes, as you can see here, and again the big ears, and you see that this is a second dog that it's leaning on. And they have these white areas on their coats. Some packs have virtually no white on them, and others have a lot of it. So they can look very different in different parts of Africa. Typically in East Africa they're very, very dark, and in Southern Africa you find more of the dogs that have a lot of white on their coat. So if I just go to, this is their main prey species in Southern Africa in particular. So you've got the kudu here, which is a large horse-like antelope. The impala, which is their main source of food, and duiker, which is a tiny little thing which, is really just a snack. They're not going to live off duiker very long. And I did want to show you, this is a dog wearing a collar. I'll talk about these collars more in the future. That's what this is as well, the tracking antenna. But you can see their teeth here. So they also have very unusual dentition. They have what are called carnassial molars. So their back teeth are not made for chewing. They are made for tearing flesh and then it's swallowed. They don't chew anything. They literally, their teeth can clean off a carcass in a time you would not believe. And just to show you this, so this is a shot. Most of these photos were either taken by me or by my husband, Nigel. We'd seen this. These dogs are in Mana pools in Zimbabwe, and we'd seen this pack. They had literally been lying outside our camp in the morning. We saw them race off to the left, race back to the right in pursuit of this impala ram, and literally, killed it. We arrived literally moments after it was dead. There were about 20 dogs in this pack, and you can see here the white tips on the tails that I was talking about. We watched them eat this impala, and we then, because we were with a conservationist, once they had finished the kill and left, because they don't hang around the kill, that's another big difference between these dogs and, say, lions or hyenas. They eat, they gulp down all that food, and then they leave. And one of the reasons is that as soon as vultures see this, lions and hyenas love to follow vultures. Lions scavenge if they can. Everybody thinks of hyenas as scavengers and lions as this noble killer. But in fact, hyenas are excellent predators. They can kill animals like wildebeest perfectly easily. They're very excellent hunters. And lions do scavenge. So the dogs know that if a lion appears, they're going to give up their kill to the lion. So they eat it as fast as they can and they leave. And the same with hyenas. If there were one or two hyenas, that's fine. But as soon as they start calling in backup, the dogs will give up their kill. So they're literally, tearing flesh off the carcass, and then they're leaving. And we watched this, and in 20 minutes, what was left of this carcass was the head and a couple of legs. Now, if the dogs were really, really hungry, they would have eaten the legs, and they would have eaten most of the head as well. So obviously this pack was fairly well fed. I don't have a photo. I should have put the photo in of what was left, because honestly, I mean, it sounds gory, but it was fascinating to see. So it was as if they had peeled the skin back from the shoulders. There was the vertebrae of the neck was in there, and it was just a bag of empty skin. They'd made a hole in the throat and taken out the tongue, which is very tasty. The rest of the head was untouched. The front legs, one front leg, one back leg was untouched, and normally they would eat that. So it was quite amazing, and that was 20 minutes. They literally, and there was nothing left. It looked like it had been dead there for 2 days. So quite amazing to see. They're very, very efficient hunters, the most efficient hunter in the African bush, in terms of the percentage of hunts that are successful.
What was the approximate weight of that animal they were eating?
The weight of the impala?
Yes.
Well, the dogs are probably about between 50 and 65 pounds for a big male, say. The impala is probably at least 3 times that, so it could be, I'm kind of trying to work on I don't know the weight of an impala, but I'm guessing it's about 150 pounds. But this is by no means the largest prey that the dogs can bring down. A kudu is much bigger than this. And one of the conservationists that I know was talking about having seen one dog kill an adult male kudu, which now they are sort of my height at the shoulder. They're big antelope. And so these dogs are really incredible hunters. They're persistent, they're fast, they're also very clever. The pack seems to operate on they seem to know who is skilled at what. So, for example, this same conservationist was telling me that there was one dog in one of these packs he studied, and it was a completely useless hunter. The entire pack would be off after impala, and this one would be off in the distance bouncing after a rabbit. And after a while, this dog was basically left with the pups. It was like, you're useless, you're going to stay here with the pups and look after the pups, and we're going to go hunting. And so they really do divide, tasks amongst the pack. It's not just random who gets to stay with the pups when they have pups, So they're really quite an amazing species. But like most dogs, most canids, if you think of wolves here, jackals, coyotes, they have a bad reputation. So people, for some reason, love their domestic dogs, but they hate wild dogs. There is something about that. We just have it. It's been existing for centuries. And one of the reasons is with these dogs, the way they kill can look very gory. They're literally gulping meat off an animal. they often disembowel a larger animal while it's running to kill it. But if you think about it, these dogs, once they get hold of you, you are dead in seconds, and then you're eaten. A lion, for example, if you see a lion trying to kill a buffalo, that can go on for hours. And if that buffalo gets stuck somewhere, lions will begin eating it, and it's not dead. And I've spoken to conservationists who've seen horrific cases of buffalo wandering around, still half alive, because the lion's finished and left, and they never killed it, because they don't want to go near the dangerous end of the buffalo to suffocate it. So these dogs have a terrible reputation, or did, for the brutal way that they allegedly kill their prey, but they're very efficient, and when they get hold of you, you're going to be dead very quickly. And recently a lot of conservationists have come to the conclusion that a lot of animals don't really suffer when they're killed that fast, because if you think about it, when if you think of stories of people who've had horrific accidents, you don't feel the pain until later sometimes. People who've had an arm cut off, they initially don't feel the pain until the realization sets in. Well, by the time the realization sets in, this antelope is well and truly dead. So it's really the perception of how animals kill and what is cruel and what is humane is really changing. And that's one of the things that has been very important in studying the dogs and trying to persuade people that they should live with the dogs rather than kill them as vermin. Because for years they were killed as vermin, even inside national parks. Right, here's a short piece of video which is going to show that sometimes the prey species, have the upper hand. So these dogs were sort of testing the herd of wildebeest here and seeing if there was a weak link somewhere. But the wildebeest is just as likely to chase the dogs. So maybe if you can just, you need to put the pointer on the image and then hit the blue button. There we go. Is it going to play? So it was a little bit of a dangerous situation there for those wildebeest, because they had a bunch of youngsters in the middle, and the dogs, it kind of looks very, we're all just cantering around, but actually the dogs did give up and leave without trying to pick out a wildebeest, but they have to be very careful. So the collars I was talking about, one of the things I was doing when I visited this project was to go out, and we were tracking the dogs. And tracking them, we didn't have fancy GPS collars that downloaded information. It was a case of going out and listening in the vehicle, as you saw on the previous slide there. And then once you could hear this beep through the headphones, then you get out the directional antenna and try to find the dog. But you're only listening for a specific collar, not for any collar. So you've got the guy who's doing the tracking, this guy here, his name is Jealous and Glovu, and he knows where all the dogs generally hang around, but they're very difficult to find. I was there for 6 weeks and we saw the dogs 6 times. That was it. So when you do find them, then often they're lying in really thick bush where you can't actually, see them at all. So here's the second piece of video. This is tracking the dogs, and then we found a dog here. There's one of the dogs wearing the collar, which I'll explain a bit more about in a moment. There were only 2 of them here, and this was actually the father at the back and the son, which is quite strange because they were both the alpha males of separate packs, so we're not quite sure why they were together. There's a spotted hyena being chased away, because the hyenas will often just hang around the dogs, knowing how successful they are at hunting, just to see if they're going to kill something. So this was in Wangi National Park again as well. And so here's one of the collars that was on the dog. Now you might think, oh, this is a really heavy collar. Well, the reason is, partly you've got the tracking antenna, which is back here. But the main reason these collars are so big is to protect the dogs from being caught in snares. Now the snares are not set to catch dogs, they're set to catch antelope and other species that can be eaten by people. But the dogs, because they move such huge distances and they don't really have a home base, when they have pups they'll stay in an area for a little while, but once the pups are mobile, they don't go back to the same place every day. So they move huge distances. And these collar, because of that, they get caught in a lot of snares. And so this collar is created it's got lines of metal studs on it like this, about 5 or 6 lines around the front of the collar. And what that does is if the dog walks into a snare, it catches the wire so that the wire is caught on the collar and not above or below the collar, where the dog will struggle and it could kill the dog. Now, amazingly, even when a dog that's not caught, a dog that doesn't have a collar on, gets caught in a metal snare, they can break that snare, which just shows the incredible power of the animal. And I mean, they do themselves horrific injuries by doing that, obviously. But they can break a metal snare. These collars mean that they can easily break the snare and get out of it. The snares look like this is obviously a coiled snare, so they're literally made out of wire fencing, maybe telephone wire, whatever anybody can find. And the anti-poaching units collect thousands of them in the bush. So here is a collar taken from a dog that was caught in a snare, and you can see what the dog has done to those metal studs by trying to get out of this, and what's happened here. The dog survived this snaring incident. So when a dog is snared, it's unfortunately, because the numbers of dogs are have been dropping so precipitously over the last 100 years. Every dog is important, and they live in very, very close-knit packs. There's an alpha male and an alpha female. When the two alpha dogs are not necessarily the biggest or the fastest or the the heaviest dogs, they are the smartest dogs. They're the ones who control what is going to happen when. And so the loss of an alpha dog is really very important to a pack. If a pack loses either its alpha male or its alpha female, the pack might break up. So every dog is important, and that's why they try to collar a lot of the dogs in this particular area. One of the other issues that the African wild dog has is that it can catch diseases like distemper and rabies from domestic dogs. Not by breeding with the domestic dogs, because they can't do that, but just by passing by villages and picking up diseases. And they move in and out of the national park all the time because the parks are not fenced. So the dog's, territory might encompass a lot of ranching areas or communal areas where there are a lot of villages and people with cattle and goats. And so they can easily pick up diseases like that and are susceptible to them. One of the big parts where they've been very successful in painted dog conservation is in bringing in people from the surrounding area, particularly children, and teaching them about the dogs and showing them how they can live with the dogs instead of having people killing them just because they're afraid that they will prey on livestock. they've been doing testing the scat of the painted dogs for years at this project, and there are remarkably few instances where the dogs have ever killed any domestic livestock. They always go for their natural prey if they can. And so this is me over here. This was a class that they've done at their bush house, so they bring the kids in and they spend a week at the project, and it's really starting to show results. They've been doing this now for at least a dozen years, and now the project is actually employing some of the children who have grown up, who now want to work in conservation. They also find that the children influence their parents, and so parents who may have in the past, tried to kill a dog, their children will be telling them about the dogs and why they're so important. And for any of you here who've been on safari in Africa, you'll know that seeing the dogs is really the highlight of a trip, more so than seeing lions or elephants, just because they can be so difficult to find. So the dogs have now become a real draw for tourists, which is really helpful. And they also have this great visitor centre, which explains in both English and Ndebele all about the dogs and how they live. And all of this was sourced and made locally by the Zimbabweans are very skilled artists and artisans, so everything was made in the local area. And actually they even use the wire that they pick up from snares in the walls of the building, as a support between the beams for putting the mud on the walls. So they use everything locally, which is great. And just before I forget to tell you why they call them painted dogs, I thought it's appropriate to have a painting of a dog on the screen while I do this. A lot of people feel that the name African wild dog it's a name that was really given to the dogs in the age when they were being persecuted relentlessly, mostly by ranchers. And it implies that they are domestic dogs that have run off into the bush. It implies that they're dangerous to people, whereas in fact there has never been a recorded case of the dogs attacking people, except for, and this is a completely irrelevant incident in terms of the history of dogs and people, but I'm sure some of you might remember the terrible story of dogs at a zoo. I've forgotten where it was now. But anyways, a mother dropped her child into the dog enclosure in a zoo by accident, and the dogs killed the child. But in their wild habitat, there's never been a recorded case of them killing anybody. So painted dog is a name which gets away from those connotations of wild, feral. It also refers to their Latin name, which is Lycaon pictus. So pictus is painted wolf-like animal. And of course it refers to the fact that their coats are multicoloured. So that's the name that is used by many people, particularly in Zimbabwe. And of course, as an artist, it gives that's great for me. So these are just a couple of tiny little sketches. They were actually, the actual sizes of these were maybe, 3 by 5 inches. So you're seeing them a lot bigger than they were supposed to be seen. But these are just a couple of tiny little sketches that I was doing while I'm out in the bush. And another one, this was from Botswana, the dogs setting out on a hunt. And this was a couple of dogs. As you can see, you may remember from my last talk, I don't necessarily use realistic colours. I think this one is not quite so vivid as it appears on the screen, but it's definitely blue. So my paintings, that last one is a field sketch. You can see all the white around here. It's started in pencil, and then I add the watercolour when I'm back at camp, or while I'm watching the dogs if I can, but they tend to be moving very fast, so that's not normally possible. But I always add the colour from memory or imagination. I'm never looking at photographs or video. My studio paintings also are not done from photographs. I come up with the compositions while I'm out walking my own dog, who's a German Shepherd. And again, you can see I don't use realistic colours, but I use colour just to show a mood or perhaps a time of day. And I'll come up with an idea for a composition. I've sketched the dogs a lot, so I can do most of the drawing for the painting without referring to any photos. And it's only if I want to check something, at the last stage when I'm doing the painting, that I may refer to a photograph. But I don't have a photograph, like this. And the great thing about sketching from life is that once you know the shape of the animal, you can put them into a painting in any position because you get to learn the anatomy. So that's my aim. And this painting here was a fairly recent one. It's called Man's Best Friend, ? And you can see here, this is an acrylic, fluid acrylic on canvas. And the original is 24 by 30 inches. But this one has a story behind it. So I'm going to show you the next slide just to zoom in a little. So you can see, do you see here, this is actually the outline of Africa turned on its side. Okay? And the dark areas, those spots there, this band here, and all of sub-Saharan Africa, that's where the dogs used to exist in 1900. The white areas, which are probably bigger than they should be actually, but it's painting. The white areas, a little bit here in East Africa, and then Southern Africa, Kruger, Botswana, a little bit in Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe. That's where the dogs exist now, in the wild. Their numbers have dropped down to 1% of what they were in 1900. So there are now, and they're difficult to count, but there are roughly somewhere around 5,000 of these dogs left now. And you can see that their range has completely reduced down to these areas here. For a while they thought they were still existing in Cameroon, but they've been declared extinct there, along with the cheetah. So yeah, their range has shrunk considerably. And the reason for that is, as we saw earlier, a lot of snaring, a lot of persecution, some disease. They also get hit on the roads a lot because they travel huge distances, and like most predators, they will use an easier route if it's available. So, if you're on safari in a park and you see lions, chances are they're walking down a track. They'll use the tracks rather than walking down through the bush because it's a lot easier. The same with the dogs. And a lot of the parks, as I said, are unfenced. And the park I was showing you, Wangi National Park, literally outside the park is the main road from Bulawayo, which is Zimbabwe's second city, to Victoria Falls, plus a train line. So, there are a lot of roads, there are quite a lot of deaths on the roads where dogs are just run over because they decided to sleep on the road. So that's always a problem. I know you had a question. Yeah, go ahead. Oh yes, you beat me to it. So, those who are looking carefully. So I wanted to show not only what was happening to the dogs and the range being reduced, But if you look over here, there is a human footprint. Because we are responsible, really, for almost all of their decline in numbers. And the other thing, which is a little more difficult to see, I'm going to come over here. First of all, if I hold my hand like this, you see this is, I have to move further away, there, you see? There is a human handprint as well. So I often do this with my paintings and include a conservation message, so that hopefully, if I go back, you could look at this painting and, you might like it, but you may know nothing about it. That most people do eventually notice the footprint. Hardly anybody notices the handprint. And, and I don't, because the map of Africa is on its side, that's not, initially easy to notice. But that's always my intention, is to have a painting that gives a message, but you could still appreciate it for the painting without knowing the message as well. Although I think most people are more interested, when they see the message, the painting becomes more interesting as well. And the other thing is that the dog here is leaping over, these washes of colour. And so I wanted to show that if we can actually help the African wild dogs or painted dogs by reducing the persecution and allowing them to move freely where they need to move, the dogs can easily escape these boundaries that we've put, or these obstacles, that we've put in front of them. But the main problem now for them is habitat loss, which is the same for virtually every species in every country, in every continent on this planet right now, apart from a few who love to live with us, like Canada geese and coyotes and rabbits and squirrels. They're all doing very nicely, but most other species are in major decline, unfortunately. Even things like zebra, giraffe, because people, particularly in Africa, the population is expanding hugely, and even if people are okay living with those animals, there often just isn't the space for them anymore. That's a serious problem, along with climate change, which is changing the places where they can still live. So major issues, not specific to Africa. Here's another piece of video which just shows a few of the dogs playing. These are adults. They do like to have a little. They were just playing around this piece of grass here, leaping in and out. And so that was my video that I took in Botswana, and that actually inspired this painting. Now, you might not see much similarity between that video and this painting, but this painting did begin life with some grass in it. But then I decided that actually the grass was really unnecessary. I do like to eliminate things from my paintings, because I think you can tell from the pose of the two animals that they're in a playful mood. That's what your domestic dog will do when it wants to play. Bend down and put its back end up in the air, and its ears are up and its tail's up. And so this one was really just showing the playful nature of the dogs. So even the adults will often play. It's not just the pups, which makes them very interesting to watch as well. And so just before I finish up and see if anybody has any questions, I just wanted to let you all know, and there are some postcards on the desk over here. I'm actually going to be having an exhibit. This is one of my paintings at the top here, with a friend of mine. This is his painting here. Sean Merthyr is his name. And this is going to be at the Wright Arts Centre from the end of March. So if anybody is interested in coming along, please pick up a postcard, and maybe I can pass you on the detail and you can put it out into the newsletter. That would be great. We actually have a reception on, you can see down here, March 22nd, but we also, if you know of any children or adults who are interested in learning to sketch from life, we're going to be doing, Sean and I are going to be doing, because he sketches in the field as well, we're going to be doing a session, one for children, one for adults, on March the 24th, where we actually have live animals, including, we hope, an African crested porcupine, which is a much bigger animal than the American porcupine. I mean, they literally can be this tall, and they don't climb trees, they're too heavy. So we're going to be sketching from live animals, courtesy of Animal Embassy. So if you know anyone who's interested, feel free to, you need to register in advance. But I just wanted to let you know about that. I think it's gonna fill up pretty quickly. So you're actually getting to know this before I've even sent out any postcards, because I only got them the other day. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much, and feel free to take a look at my website, which is Art Inspired by Africa, and thank you for inviting me back again. I can take a few questions if anybody has. Oh, sorry, just a moment. Good idea. Okay.
Question here.
Go ahead.
These dogs disappearing, there must be predators. What are disappearing?
The predators for the dogs, you mean? Yeah, nothing hunts and eats the dogs. The reason they're disappearing is because of all the things that we're doing. So the snaring, the killing on the roads, the fact that ranchers in some places are still shooting them, and as I said, the most important thing is just losing habitat. The dogs need, particularly in some areas of Africa, like where I used to live in Botswana, in the Kalahari Desert, there isn't a lot of prey, so they need massive territories. So you might find, in an area that has a lot of prey species, you might find several packs living in close proximity to each other. But in the Kalahari, they're going to have massive territories because there just isn't enough food. So as people expand, and there are more and more people across Africa, there is just less and less space for these dogs. And they have to, like all animals, one of the big problems with habitat loss is, people talk about, lions are going to be extinct in 20 years, elephants are going to be extinct. I don't believe that for a moment, but that doesn't mean they're going to do well. What it means is we will have isolated populations that can't breed because they're going to get so inbred, because national parks are cut off from each other by human populations. And so you end up with more disease, you end up with genetic problems. And the dogs, what happens with them is that when you have a litter of pups, when they come to about 2 to 3 years of age, a group of sisters from that litter will get together and they will leave the pack, and a group of brothers will get together and leave the pack, and they won't go together because they can't obviously breed, don't want to breed with each other, and so they will head off. And when it's each of those groups, even from when they were a tiny puppy, they will know which is the dominant female in the group and which is the dominant male. So they will already have decided that amongst themselves as puppies. And so when they go off and search for the sisters are searching for a band of brothers, and the brothers are searching for a group of sisters. And when they meet up, it's actually the female dogs who decide, are they going to stick with this group of males that they met, or are they not? And that's where they think that they look at the coat patterns, because particularly some of these dogs that have the white on their coats, they have some really intricate patterns. And although the puppies may not all have the identical pattern, there's often like a marker, one tiny piece of a pattern that every puppy from that litter had. And so they think that that's how they can tell. So let's say that this band of sisters goes off and this band of brothers goes off, and all they can find is areas that are populated by people. They can't find any other dogs. They can't breed. And hence you get these isolated populations, and then they get genetic problems, and then their numbers continue to drop further. So, thank you. I know there was a question at the back.
Same question.
Okay, great.
Here's the question.
They're just going to bring the microphone around here.
He's got a microphone already.
Oh, you got one. Okay.
I have one here. Alison, I just happened to be watching a program, I believe it was Animal Planet last weekend,
Uh-huh.
and they had a whole segment on these painted dogs with Jim Hanna, I think, the gentleman from Wild Kingdom.
Right,
And he visited a compound where there was a huge pack of them. I
right.
was wondering if you were familiar with that, or was that happen to be where you were?
I don't know where he was. I'm guessing probably he was somewhere in South Africa because...
Or South Africa?
I don't know, but I'm guessing because basically in South Africa, there are a lot of private parks, private game parks, and a lot of those parks do have a pack of dogs. And those are where they'd be far more approachable than, if you were in a game reserve in Botswana, for example. But it could have been Zimbabwe, who knows?
Well, it seemed to be the lady who was running the park. They've had these dogs since they were pups.
Oh, okay, then,
Bring them up.
right. So maybe they were trying to bring them up to release into a park. But that's incredibly difficult to do. Just because these dogs, they've never been domesticated, that's the first thing. They really are wild through and through. And so there certainly are places where they breed these dogs, and private game reserves, particularly in southern Africa, will often be able to go out and they'll have a pack of dogs, but then those reserves are often fenced. And then you have this really difficult issue of what happens when they have a litter of pups, and now the pack's going to split. Those sisters are going to want to leave. Those brothers are going to want to leave. If they can't leave, they're going to mate with their relatives, which is not good. They're also going to really, really test your fence. They will get out. If there's any chance of them getting out, they will. If there's a storm and there's a gully where water has come under the fence, the dogs will be out of that reserve. And so again, it's that isolation. Where are they going to go once they get out? It's very difficult, and I think we've realised this all over the world. It's very, very difficult to manage wild animals inside a fenced reserve.
These dogs are high-speed eaters. You said they can clean in 20. How do they get food to their pups?
So they, if they have pups back at the den, they will gulp down all the food, charge back to the den, and then they'll regurgitate food for the pups. And one of the other things that makes them really unique is that they don't only do that for their pups, they'll do it for other adult dogs who, like the dog who was useless at hunting, who stayed with the pups. They'll give him some food. And if there's a sick dog or an injured dog that can't hunt, or just a dog that got lost on the hunt and didn't get to the kill in time, they will regurgitate food for that dog as well. So they really look after each other as in the pack in a way that really no other predator does. Lions won't do that. If lions make a kill and a lioness doesn't reach the kill and doesn't eat, she'll die. Wolves don't do that. You see all those other predators fighting when they get to a kill. These dogs don't fight. They literally, you're all in there gulping down as much food as you can. It looks chaotic, but they're not fighting over the food. And the pups, once they're actually able to join on the hunt, they actually get to eat first, which might sound great, but it's not actually a good survival strategy if food is in short supply. So yeah, regurgitation is how they feed the pups. Yeah.
I've seen a lot of other shows where they try to improve genetic diversity, including yesterday, the Science Times were talking about mammoths. Is it possible to move the animals from one area to another to do that, or does
Yeah,
that's
no,
not their social structure?
it happens on a regular basis, particularly in South Africa, where basically most species have a governing organisation under CITES, which if you have animals in protected areas that are fenced, they want to make sure that there really isn't any inbreeding. So yeah, on a regular basis, a big industry in South Africa, which has a lot of fenced private reserves, is the translocation of all kinds of species to prevent inbreeding. Yeah, it's a huge business, and when it comes to one of the big problems with on a different topic on rhino poaching in South Africa, which is appalling statistics, at the moment. One of the big differences is that it used to be people going out into the bush and tracking the rhino, and now there have been cases of vets involved, people flying bush planes or helicopters for game translocation operations, because they can be in and out. They know where the rhino are. People are moving rhino around like they're moving other animals around to make sure that there's no inbreeding, and so it's opened up a whole different set of problems. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be much cheaper and more efficient to use artificial insemination rather than moving animals?
Yeah, you could, except that nature finds a way. That's, it's like, and if you're going to artificially inseminate an animal, you have to knock it out. You have to anaesthetize it. And animals die that way, and it costs a fortune, and it's stressful. So yes, it's perfectly possible, but it doesn't mean that they're still not going to breed, and it doesn't mean it's going to work, and it all costs a lot of money. And unfortunately, donations to conservation are a minuscule amount of the entire amount of money that is donated every year to various good causes. Tiny. If we could only spend as much on conservation as we spend on our domestic dogs, we could make huge strides. Yeah, we really could. So think about that, and also one thing, I have to sort of get on my soapbox a little bit here. When you look at, it's very easy to raise money by showing people a sad story about a little elephant calf, or, a poor little lion cub, or a bear somewhere, That's great, but your money is far better spent on a conservation organisation that is working to make sure that people and wildlife can live in harmony without fences. That's much better than giving money to a sanctuary. Some sanctuaries are great, and they really do intend to release animals, but think what it costs to keep an animal and try to release that one animal back to the wild. And then think how much good that same amount of money could do if you gave it to that conservation organisation and they used it to work with local communities to improve education. It's just nonsensical, but all of the, you can understand why the organisations do that, because it's very easy to raise money that way. But if you take away something, from this today, two things actually. One is, think about, if you're going to donate money to animal organisations, think about what they're really doing with it. Conservation in the field may not be, sexy and intriguing the way it is seeing a story about an elephant calf, one calf, but they're probably doing a lot more with the money. And the second thing is, I should not fail to mention about the dogs. There's new research going on now that is showing that having tourists, because it is mostly tourists, who going to dens to see puppies is really proving to be a problem for the dogs. It doesn't appear to be a problem because the dogs appear to be behaving quite naturally. The puppies come out and play, everything looks fine. But what one of the researchers I've been working with, Dr. Greg Rasmussen, is finding is that the adults are much more likely to move the pups to a new den if they feel that they're being visited all the time. When they move, pups inevitably die, so that is a problem. Also, when you, as a tourist, you're in a vehicle. Now, when you remember what I said about lions using tracks. So if a lion suddenly finds this well-worn new track appearing in the bush, they're not going to walk past it, they're going to go, oh, I wonder where this goes. And then they find the den and kill the pups, because that's what they'll do. Hyenas will do that, leopards will do that. So there, and also they discovered that the adult dogs are not coming back to the den as frequently to feed the pups. So if you're on a safari and you don't know what you're going to see, but if they say to you, there is a dog den and we can go see the pups, you really have to ask them to hang back. It's very tempting, and I know because I've also been on a vehicle that has been that close, but I won't do it now. Now I know. So I'm sorry, I've told you, now you know. But it's all right to go, but just don't let them drive, within like 25 feet, hang back. And if the bush is thick, because it should be around a den, they don't want, hyenas and things finding it. If the bush is thick, you don't want to be driving through the bush and creating new tracks to get to the den. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
No? Okay, that's great. Well, thank you again.